My name is Rahul Sons, and I am the host of the On Meaningful Work podcast and the founder of the Disruptive Business Network. For those of you who are new to the podcast, the On Meaningful Work podcast is really about the journeys that people have taken to find real meaning and a sense of purpose in the work that they do. Each conversation tries to highlight those sources of meaning that have influenced a career that's built on purpose. In this episode, I chat with serial entrepreneur Kunal Kalro. We chat about his upbringing in Dubai, the decision making that kind of formed his early decisions in education and his primary career path. And we talk about entrepreneurship. We talk about the lure of entrepreneurship, what most people get wrong, and also about Kunal's lessons from his personal failures. We conclude the conversation by chatting about how a personal tragedy really led to an inquiry into the real lack of diversity in genetic research, which then led to the founding of Kunal's latest company, EugeneLabs. Now, Kunal is a dear friend of mine, and I had a great time chatting with him, and I learned heaps. And I really hope you do too. Thank you for listening. Alrighty, Kunal.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah. This kind of feels almost like we're having a chat because just to give people context, we used to be housemates and this used to be my old pad.
Yep.
So it just feels like us having a chat with these big bulky microphones in
just
our faces.
It's like what we normally do, right? Like, it's like how we normally chat.
Yeah. So how are you, man? We spent the majority of last year's lockdown together, but how are you coping this time around?
This time it's not too bad. It was only 3 weeks, right? And we had some breaks in between in terms of things were slightly moved along and fewer restrictions. So it's not that bad. I feel like I'm pretty used to it now. It's like, cool. Stay at home.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah.
Let's just plow through it.
I've been here, done it. Let's do this again.
Yeah.
It's fine. It kind of feels annoying that you have the rest of the world that's starting to open up, but we're still sitting here because we cannot organize ourselves out of a paper bag and vaccinate anyone. So that feels annoying. But
I know
other
that
than
is frustrating. Yeah. So this, as you know, this podcast is really about, I suppose, your journey, in terms of your professional life and your entrepreneurial adventures and so on. But before we get to that, what's your origin story? Like, where are you from? Where are you born?
Yeah. So I was born in Dubai. Actually, before we get into this, the plant is straight up in your face. I don't know if you want to keep it there. It's up to you.
All right. We'll pause for a second. And we're back. So
I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to look at you straight with a straight face this whole time, if it's going to stay there. All right. So I guess origin story wise, so my family's from India, but I was born in Dubai. My parents had moved to Dubai early 80s before I was born for a few years before I was born. And I grew up there. I went to high school there, primary school there. And then after high school, I moved to the U.S. to do university. Went to Indiana, of all places.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Like the Indy 500.
Yeah, that's probably the only thing it's known for, to be honest. It's all right.
Racking my brain, like what happens.
That's pretty much it. And it was a really interesting experience. Major culture shock if you think about it, because I'd never been to the US at this time, and I grew up in the Middle East and my family was from India, and I did go back home to India quite often as well, but moving to a whole new place and moving to the US for the first time ever and moving to Midwest US was a bit of a strange experience.
Actually, before we get into that, like, what was Dubai like growing up? Like,
fair. Very different to what it is today.
Yeah.
In some pretty big ways. It was not nearly as much the bastion of capitalism as it is today.
Yeah.
Maybe if it's not capitalism, it's at least a bastion of materialism,
Mm-hmm.
which it wasn't back then. It was kind of a small town in a way, not that many people, maybe 1 million or so.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up there was not what you might expect Dubai to be like as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty simple, and obviously lots of desert land.
Mm.
And when I grew up there, every picture you see of Dubai in terms of its skyline simply didn't exist. It was just sand.
Mhm.
So very different place as it is now. I think things started to change a lot more once I was about 12 or 13. And
Yep.
Dubai started to invest a lot in all this real estate, essentially, right? Like building these really tall skyscrapers in the middle of
Yeah.
the desert. And things started to change quite a lot from then on.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture of cars has probably always been there, but it started to expand to other areas as well. And materialism, whether it's cars, money, watches,
Mm-hmm.
anything that's kind of a status symbol, fashion, became more and more prominent in our daily lives, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a strange experience to have that transition happen once we're in our teenage years.
Yeah.
And I've never really cared too much about all of those things. So by the time I was 16, 17, I was like, yeah, it's I got to get out of here. It's also organizationally racist and institutionally racist and sexist and all of the is.
Yep.
And
All of
so-
these. Yep.
So I really was ready to opt out.
What was schooling like there? Like.
So I went to an international school.
Mm-hmm.
Probably explains a few aspects of my accent.
Yes.
So it was a British
It's
high
always
school.
puzzled me, that accent. No.
Yeah, I know. It's a strange one, let's be real. So yeah, I went to a British high school, but most of my teachers were from the subcontinent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did like O levels and AS levels and A levels or whatever the British system is. Most people most expat kids will go to private schools because the public schools are in Arabic. And so you really don't do that because realistically, most expats aren't planning for a long-term life in Dubai. And quite frankly, if you only know Arabic, you really would have a hard time doing long-term life in Dubai anyway.
Yep.
And so so most of us went to international schools, whether it's the Indian system or the British system or IB or whatever. Yeah.
And what were you like at school? Did you enjoy it? Did you?
I did. It was weird. I was actually really bad at school until I think I turned about 13 or 14 or something, and then started to do surprisingly well. And I'm not sure. I was like, oh, the neurons weren't firing until then is kind of my reasoning, because I really don't have anything else to claim.
Yeah.
But I was actually a pretty good student, but I was a troublemaker. I was a good student because my parents had a simple rule. If I got good grades, I mean, immigrant parents, you know how it is.
Yep.
If I got good grades, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. If you don't get good grades, you're basically grounded all the time. Also, you don't really have an option. You have to get good grades.
Yeah. I feel you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so pretty much I figured out what I had to do was get excellent grades, and then I could do whatever I want. And that whatever I want meant I got into trouble a lot. Had a bit of a arsonist vibe going on. Not
Whoa.
arsonist, just like a pyro. Arsonist is criminal. Pyro, just like fire.
So you didn't burn the school down?
I did not burn the school down. No. I don't plead the fifth. I actually just didn't burn the school down.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So besides school and studies and the pyrotechnics, like like say around that age, 10, 11, 12, like what were your hobbies? Like what were you passionate about, like outside of school?
So fire is not a passion, you saying?
Oh, okay. Yeah, fire.
No,
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
It's probably the symbol of passion.
So I played a lot of sports. I think since childhood, I've had this sort of desire to just be good at as many things as possible. And whether that was physical or intellectual, I was always interested in that. So Played a lot of sport. Played basketball and I'm 5'6", so that's not but used to good at dribbling.
Yeah, I mean the speed counts as well.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. And so played a lot of sport, hung out with friends a lot. I also played a lot of video games. You know, it was like that whole Counter-Strike era.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was not much else to do in Dubai, so it was pretty much play basketball, and when you're tired, you go play Counter-Strike, and then after that, you go smoke shisha, which definitely was, they should not have been serving us because we were 13 at the most, and we looked like we were 10 because I looked very young, and yeah, so that life was a lot of that, not a lot of extracurricular activities out of school. So most of the stuff that we did was pretty much out of school. Not a lot of extracurricular activities in school. So a lot of the stuff we did was out of school. Yeah.
Yep. And then so you finish high school and then you go to the US. Like what did you decide to study in the US?
Accounting and finance, because I'm a good Indian boy.
Wow, I mean, I knew that, but I was shocked when I found out, because here you are sitting in like a leopard print jacket, you know, as far away from my imaginings of what accounting and finance would be.
100%.
So that was to please the parents box.
You gotta take the box. That's no. So my parents, you know, they weren't super well off, and they saved money for my education probably since the day I was born, to be honest.
Yeah.
And when I went to the U.S. to study, and when I told them I wanted to go to the U.S. to study, there was never a question of whether or not they would pay for it. They were going to pay for it, even though realistically, I think if you looked at their annual income, which I didn't understand at the time because I didn't have my accounting and finance degree, was just simply not that big. And the idea of me asking for something like that, look back at it and be like, well, that's pretty ludicrous. But they'd saved a lot of money for that. And so when I went to the US, it was very much a thing of, you have to get a degree in something that's practical and something that is going to have marketable value beyond university. Liberal arts degrees don't generally fall into that category. But I did
not for Indian parents, no.
Not for Indian parents, for sure. Yeah, I wanted to study sociology, and my parents were like, "Cool, are you paying for it?" It's like, fair call. Yeah.
I mean, so I ticked the box doing engineering.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, looking back, I'm glad I did it because it has its uses. Yeah. But especially at the time, I wouldn't have picked engineering.
Oh, yeah. Same, really. I mean, you know, I run a company now and I manage the finances, and it's a big part of my job. And I would not have been able to do that if I didn't have those skills that sure, I could pick it up on the go or learn by doing and all of that kind of stuff. But accounting and finance is the kind of skills that you don't really learn unless someone forces you to learn them. And university forced me to learn them.
And also, I mean, running a company, that's pretty much like a big part of the puzzle is
100%. Yeah. You can't run a company if you run out of money. That's just nature of it.
Yeah. Or understanding how that works, because it is almost an art of, you know, which levers to pull, and when to spend, when to save, when to constrict, when to open up. These are all pretty important. I mean, for Eugene anyway, it's venture funded, so it's sort of investor funded, and that means that you know, you're running a particular type of race every time. You're always racing against the clock. So having a really good understanding about where the money's going, how much is going every month, and what it's going to take to get to the right levels, and make sure that the company continues to prosper and grow and all of that kind of stuff is definitely an art. But to get there, you need those base skills. Like, if you don't know how to paint, you're not going to be a good painter. True.
Yeah.
So then, Indiana.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was that like? Like, coming out of Dubai, you know?
Yeah. But it was strange. It was 2004. So
wow. Yep.
Background context is that, you know, that's 3 years after the September 11 attacks.
Yes.
In the middle of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, or just like the beginning of it. And that meant that I suppose the sentiment against brown people was at an all-time high.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's worse now.
It comes and goes.
Yeah. Peaks and troughs. It wasn't good at the time. It was definitely worse a couple of years before when it had just happened. But that sentiment was pretty much still alive. And Indiana is in the Midwest, and so it is a conservative state. And while Indiana University is in a small town, and it's a college town, so it's mostly young kids who are going to university, which they're generally progressive and much nicer about it. It didn't mean that there was some of that background awareness that this is something that does come up every now and again, right? And so that was like the background context. But all in all, it was a really awesome university and a really good time there, especially because it was a big party school. So that was super fun. And outside of pockets of issues that happened every now and again, the vast majority of my experience was incredibly positive. And I wouldn't want to live in Indiana again per se, but that experience I had there was pretty amazing and meaningful. I made lots of connections that I still hold to this day. And also it sort of vaulted me into the next phase of my sort of evolution. So it was good.
So looking back on that period now, can you think of any, stories or moments or things that happened that kind of shaped what you do now or who you are now?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's kind of a big question. But
Yeah. So I think there was, so when I was at university, I was thinking about doing investment banking. Yep. And because it was one of the ones that had the highest prospects in terms of potential potential work opportunities after university, and what would pay the most, which once again, critical. Indian parents, refer to previous conversation. And I was sitting in this classroom where there were, you had like an investment banker come from wherever it was, New York or something, and they're telling you about what their life looks like and what their workday looks like, and you're kind of learning more about what this life might be. And I was sitting in this room and I was looking around, and there was literally no one. Like, we could have put a brown. This is actually what I said at the time, which is that you could have put a brown paper bag on everyone's faces and you'd never know who's who, because it seemed like people just lacked. There was just like a distinct lack of personality, individual personality, and it was just like the most samey experience of people that I've ever had in my life, where it's just like everyone here is the same. There's just no differences. There's no uniqueness about them. And they're just like, doing this thing just to fit within the box of what is expected of them. And I was like, this is not for me. I don't want this. I want something else. And I didn't figure it out in university, but it definitely sparked for me the desire to be different has always been there. And I think it has kind of played a role in how I dress and what I like to do and all of that kind of stuff. But this sort of sparked this particular interest in what can I do differently from a professional and work context. Until this point, I probably was just like, yeah, cool. Like, you study accounting, you study finance, you just do what you're supposed to do. And you express yourself in different, you can express your uniqueness in other aspects of your life, but work and professional life is just the standard.
Yeah. And you mentioned like this desire to be different. Like, before before this experience, can you trace that feeling back to a previous experience, maybe in childhood or school, or where that sort of came to the fore? Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if I could like pinpoint a particular moment in time where this has sparked, but the desire to be different has, for as long as I can remember, it has been there for me. Where, and I think when I was young or in high school or even primary school, a lot of it was expressed in what I wore or how, in like the types of hobbies that I picked up. I would often pick up hobbies that none of my friends would do.
Such as?
Well, I mean, breakdancing was one, and then it ended up so that a lot of my friends started doing that as well. And then there was, I tried to like learn guitar, which once again, not an unpopular hobby to pick up per se, but none of my friends did it. And so I tried that for a while. It was always like, on the trying different things that other people in my life did not do. And that's kind of how I got into computers too.
Yep. And I think also, I mean, since I've known you, like what I've really admired is like your sense of design, like not just in kind of how you present yourself, but kind of your living space and now your company. And, I think everything that you kind of got the design Midas touch, and like everything you touch is somehow well designed. Like how did that come about? Like, can you trace that back to a moment or a feeling or?
Yeah, totally. So, firstly, thank you. That is a big compliment. Thank you very much. Midas touch, jeez. Great. Yeah, thanks. So, I think that presentation of self is actually where my interest in design sparked. So it's not necessarily about the stuff, and it's definitely expanded to all of that and into many other areas of my life, but it started with presentation of self. And that, I think, if I were to trace it back, it would definitely be the influence my three sisters have had on me. Because I think in Indian culture, boys aren't really expected to present in any particular way.
No.
But
just good marks.
Yeah.
At school.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. And whereas girls are expected to present in a certain way. But there's just like so much, the three sisters that I had, there's just like so much influence that happens there that I became more conscious about how one presents themselves. And that combined with Dubai, which is also, when I was like 13, 14, becoming that materialistic, fashion forward kind of place where how you present yourself is how people view you, for better or for worse. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that is what it was. And so how I presented myself became more and more ingrained in my everyday life. And so a sense of that combined with my desire to be different and be unique meant that I was interested in finding different ways of still presenting myself in a nice way, right? Like to look good, but do so in a way that's different than everyone else. And I think that that's kind of sparked my interest in design at large, where it's not just about looking good and following trends and what everyone says, but what can you do that's both good and also unique.
And at the time, were you kind of seeped in like trends or like what's fashionable, or like how would you experiment with that?
Yeah. Fuck, this is like going back to the archives. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to not cuss, but
cuss away, my friend.
Edit,
like I said, we're in our couch. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So interesting. So there's like, I think like the thing that I found really interesting back then when I was a kid, and I think there is probably still elements of this that are true, which is to mark to view the trends and mark the trends that are out there at the moment, and find ways of making them unique to you. So what can you do that's like combining what's out there and then also what's inside? And that is, honestly, I think that might be an eternal search for me. So I think that I did that a lot back then too. Like I think it would be like, I'd go to a shop or whatever and be like, oh, these are like, this is what's trendy, this is what's happening. But then it wouldn't be like, oh, this is what's trendy, I should buy that. It's like, what is it? What in this trendiness is uniquely a way that I can express myself. So what's still inside is something that I want to put outside, but how can I do that within the construct of what is currently trendy? Is something that I started doing now. I think about it at like a really early age, probably not doing it very consciously, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating because like to me it seems like there's almost, I mean, which is funny, it's like going back to your obsession with pyrotechnics, like it's almost like explosive in a way, like your sense of design and your sense of self, in that it's like the way you express yourself, it is very colorful, and it's not like the dour Melbourne blacks and grays.
Yeah, you're not gonna find me in blacks.
Yeah. So anyway, so moving kind of, sorry, we're jumping all over the place.
Oh, it's fine. Jump away.
But moving back to Indiana, and you're finishing off your finance and accounting degree, and then you had this experience with the investment banker.
Yeah.
Then what was your first job out of?
Yeah, so not any less dull than investment banking at all, actually. Because, I mean, and realistically, I didn't do investment banking because I found that the personalities in there were just all the same. And I think that I saw that there was the expectation to be the same, and didn't want that. But I still like did accounting and finance. It's not that far. And I then graduated, and I did my master's as well, actually, because it was global financial crisis when I was graduating.
Yeah, wow.
2008,
yes.
Fun times for all. Yeah, big party. And I was like, 2008, I cannot enter the marketplace at this stage. It's a fucking shit show.
Yep.
And so I went back and did my master's immediately. And that was in another perfectly well-chosen, responsible decision based on my parents' input, information systems. So really...
Oh, there you go. Yeah. You tick 2 boxes now.
Tick 2 boxes. Gotta tick the boxes. And so... also really don't need to tick the boxes, but I definitely did tick the boxes. And so I did my master's, and then I graduated in 2009 with my master's, and I went and worked for Ernst & Young.
Okay, yep.
Doing consulting in information systems, and that was in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Boring as fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember the first day I walked into work, I was so excited because I always I loved Chicago. So when I first moved to Indiana, I think, the first Thanksgiving break or whatever I had that I was in the city, we decided to take a trip to Chicago. And as soon as I arrived, and I've had this moment in multiple cities in my life that I've visited, where as soon as I arrived, I was like, oh my God, I have to live here. This is amazing. I just have like an instant connection. It's like the first date where you like have sparks fly as soon as you meet the person with cities. And I was like, love this place. I have to live here at some point in my life. And obviously, Indiana, with this close proximity to Chicago, the most obvious time to do that was after I graduated, and I was like actively seeking a job in Chicago. And so I was super excited to live in Chicago. And the first day I was walking to work from the metro station, and I was like, this is so cool. I'm like doing it. I'm living my life. I'm,
Made it.
Exactly. Yeah. Made it. College grad. What's up? And it's like looking around all the tall buildings, and I'm like, this is so great. And I walk into the office, and it's orientation, and I walk out of the office at 5 p.m. and I was like, I cannot wait to quit that job. That is not gonna work for me.
Yeah. What? Okay. So what hit you that first day? Right?
It was kind of that same feeling I had in that room with the investment bankers, where I was like, oh, this is all bullshit. And everything's the same. You're it just like wasn't the right fit, clearly. And a lot of the stuff that people said with orientation at consulting firms, it's always the same. I think it's like we choose the best and brightest, especially grad consult. If you're a graduate and you're entering, it's just all the same.
Yep.
We choose the best and brightest. Like, you guys are like the cream of the crop, blah, blah, blah. And this is going to be an amazing opportunity for you, blah, blah, blah. And you look at the career progression, and it's, not that amazing anyway, in the grand scheme of things. Not that money is everything, but it's not that great. Also, the work that you do is not that interesting. And everything I heard, I was just like, this is, again, the sameness. It's just not for me. And I just had the vibe where I was just like, yeah, this isn't for me.
How long were you there?
I was there for 2 years.
Yep.
Actually. Yeah, I was there for a long time. And it was also the global financial crisis, so I was very thankful to have a job.
Yep.
And you gotta, like, even if something's not right for you, sometimes you actually just like have to do what is going to help set you up for that next phase. And quitting randomly when the company's going to sponsor your visa and all of that kind of stuff,
it's not smart.
Not smart. Also, if you're a graduate and you have no real skills, let's be real, then no one's going to hire you either. So I stuck it out I was planning to stick it out for a year, and then kind of had these medical issues where I tore my ACL and I had to go into surgery and rehab for about 6 months and stuff.
Yikes.
And good health insurance is hard to come by in the US, and so I was like,
that's another reason to stick with it.
100%. And so then I ended up staying for a couple of years.
Okay. And did you have another job after that? So when did entrepreneurship start to rear its ugly head?
So I guess a year...
Or when did you start thinking about it, rather, that I should do my own thing?
Fair. So a year after I was so I had decided, I'm like, cool, I'm just going to stick it out. I'm going to stay here for a year into my first job. And then I tore my ACL. And then I was like in, physical therapy and rehab and all that kind of stuff. And that gave me a lot of time to reflect of what I want in my life. And I knew that my options in the US were going to be pretty limited because I was limited by a visa. So I'd always have to work at a company that was willing to sponsor a visa, and that's usually a bigger company and not a lot of opportunities. And I wanted to basically not do that. I wanted to work in something more interesting, something a little bit more dynamic. Startups was obviously in that category. And I tried to look for jobs in there, and I couldn't really get through to most places, primarily because no one was going to sponsor. They don't sponsor. And I was also at the same time really fascinated with this idea of moving to South America.
Yeah. What brought that on?
Well, I had grown up in Dubai. My family's from India, and in Dubai I went to international school, so a lot of my friends were from all over Asia, Africa, and Middle East, and it was a British high school, and I went to the US to study. So I felt like I had a handle on
world culture.
I mean, like a loose handle, I should say, right? Or at least a naive idea of what a handle on world culture is at the time. And I was like, I don't know anything about South America. at all. Nothing at all. And this is a whole continent where I know nothing. And how interesting is that? And so I was really fascinated with going to South America because I was excited by that, by this idea that I like don't know anything about this place. How cool would that be? And I was like, well, I don't want to be imprisoned in the US by, being stuck at a job I don't like and only because a visa is keeping me there. And so I started to explore this idea of what it might look like to move to South America. And I started taking Spanish classes, and that was fun. And someone once told me about, at some point, someone in the class told me, oh, there's this program called Startup Chile, which is an accelerator program where they'll invite foreign entrepreneurs, give them 40 grand equity free to move to Chile and start a company. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I could start a company. If that involves moving to South America. And the broader context being that if I moved to South America and wasn't doing like something useful with my life, my parents would absolutely kill me. So there was like an element of like, this is useful. There was also the element of I was interested in the space and I would have enjoyed working for a startup, and I think that would have been like the baby step towards it.
Also around that time, like 2012, 2013, I think that was kind of like the explosion of startups in a sense, because that's when kind of the lean startup movement started getting steam, and I think like the big unicorns were just starting to ramp up, or even more.
Yeah, definitely. That was like the Groupon era. It was like 2011, and Groupon like was getting huge, and Groupon was also Chicago based, so there was a lot of, I guess, buzz around it, and that was one of the places that, one of the things that actually was like making me really excited about the startup space, because it was fast changing, there was huge opportunities, and also a culture that seemed to resonate with my personal values, which was, autonomous, independent, getting stuff done and making things happen and trying things and being more experimental as opposed to following a traditional path of, you do this job, then you get promoted and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
House, picket fence.
Yeah. A very traditional path. Yeah.
And then, so you applied for this program?
I applied for this program. Yeah. And it was the first batch that they were going to take. And I applied with one of my friends, and we happened to get in.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was that process like? Did you have to have an idea and a... Yeah.
So we had to have an idea. We had to have this... you kind of had to put together a business plan. It was pre the days where people would be like, don't send me a 15-page business plan. They were like, send me a 15-page business plan. And so you had to like put together a business plan and apply through that. Yeah.
So what was the
idea? It was actually Groupon style deals for travel in South America.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you...
Especially in ecotourism specifically, but yeah.
And how did you come
up with that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that original.
Yeah. Or was it more about getting to South America? And
I think it was a little bit more about getting to South America, but it was also about doing something fun and exciting.
Yeah.
So startups were fun and exciting, jobs were not. And that's all I knew at the time, right? Like I had no idea how hard it was going to be. I had no idea about anything at all. And it was just like, oh, like that would be fun. That would be exciting. I didn't want to move to South America just to kind of, do nothing. And I like often casually blame this on my parents, but at this stage, like it's all internal. Yeah. Right? Like my parents aren't asking me to do anything anymore, but you're like, no, like I want to do something and I have a desire to do that. And so I wanted to move to South America, but I wanted to do something interesting. Yeah.
And so tell me about South America. Like what was that like?
Awesome. Yeah, fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, like love Chile, love Argentina.
Hmm.
I've met, some of the most amazing people that I'm still incredibly close with there. Startup Chile was especially awesome because it's like, and I think at this stage I was probably like 24, 23, like still pretty young, and moving there with, you like move there and everyone in this program is young, entrepreneurial, ambitious, willing to move to a new country. It takes a certain type of person to move to a completely different country to start a business, which is like starting a business is hard work.
Yep.
And
So they were from all around the world?
all around the world.
Incredible.
Yeah. So starting a business hard work, moving to a different country to start a business, even harder because you don't know anything about it. And there were a bunch of people who had never been to South America at the time as well. So you're like moving, and same as me, moving to a whole new continent where you know nothing about the culture. You actually have to be kind of insane in the best possible way, in my opinion anyway. And that just meant that you found this instant community of people because you're like all same, like, same human.
So all the crazy people in the one asylum. Almost.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to be a bit nuts to do that, and it's like a good kind of nuts. So like everyone you met there was just like awesome.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of, I mean, although this does not compare at all with South America, but it was kind of my experience, and this is maybe like where our stories intersect, is where when I kind of started going to places like Inspire 9 and other startup meetups, and that was me coming from a corporate background. It's like, who are these crazy people, Yeah. It was literally like the cantina scene in Star Wars before Luke, heads off into the great unknown, like all these crazy weirdos playing crazy instruments.
I love that.
And so how did your idea progress? So what happened there? Like
poorly. So it was a bad idea, let's be real. So Groupon style deals were popular for about 20 minutes, and I think I started mine in the 19th minute. So I had my 1 minute, and it was so niche. It was niche on niche on niche. It was travel deals specifically in South America, and it was daily deals. So if you didn't buy it on the day or week or whatever, it was like too late. And those aren't decisions that most people would make in that period of time. And also getting in front of the right person at the right time when they're willing to purchase, especially because you still have to buy flights and coordinate dates and all of that kind of stuff. It's actually just not possible. So if you think about it, it was like trying to get a customer was trying to win the lottery. It was just unrealistic. So that failed miserably.
And so then what happened next? Were you still in Chile or did you?
Yeah, I was still in Chile. I actually moved to Argentina at the time. So I moved to Argentina and it was... I was still working on this idea. So like I started the idea in Chile, and then a few months, 6 months later or 8 months later, I moved to Argentina. And I was still working on it. And that's when at some point I decided this is actually not working anymore. Learned a lot. One of the things was don't start a business by yourself, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And then I met up with, I was, staying with Indy, who you know.
Yes, yep.
Who I met in Argentina, and she and I and one of my other friends were flatmates, and she was a travel blogger and would tell me all these like stories about stuff, and I would like tell her about all of my problems, and eventually we were like, we should probably do something together, and so we did, and that's like when we started my second business. Outrippin'. That's right.
And what was that?
So that was more like personalized recommendations and travel, and we had a few different things that we did.
I remember it was kind of like a 99 designs for travel almost, where people could bid for So we had the web app, and that was pretty much that, where you'd
put out an idea about where you want to go and what kind of stuff you're into.
Mm-hmm.
And travel bloggers would pitch you ideas for your next trip.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can choose who you'd like to kind of work with you, and they'd build out a full-on itinerary for you.
Okay. All right. So we are at the point where you're starting your next company with Outtrippin, and you met Indy.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I'm trying to get to here is this thing around entrepreneurship and why it's so important to you. Like, is it more that you just got bit by the bug and this was something that needed to happen, or what was, I suppose, the driving force behind?
Yep.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's changed over the years, and I think that it definitely started with this sense of rebellion, right? And I think that that's been there from the very beginning for me. So whether it's expressing what's unique or whatever, and it's always like a sense of not just accepting the status quo, and if anything, having a automatic response of rebellion to a status quo. So I think that a lot of it came originally from there, and then of course it's really exciting and a great opportunity to learn things, and there's so many amazing things about it that kind of reinforce that along the way. But I would say that that's where it began. It's certainly not where I'm at today, and that's not why I'm interested in entrepreneurship today, but that is probably the seedling that kind of grew into something else.
Yep. And what do you think, because entrepreneurship is now almost in the zeitgeist, in the sense how, rock music was in the zeitgeist a couple of decades ago. But what do you think people get wrong about being an entrepreneur or entrepreneurship?
So I don't know if they get it wrong, or if I don't know if this is wrong, and I think it's like a personal decision for each person in terms of what entrepreneurship means for them, and why they do it, and what are the underlying drivers and things like that. And I was saying that for a long time it was about being a rebel against the status quo. And the status quo for me was climbing the ladder, the corporate ladder, ending up in some sort of middle management position for the rest of my life, and just sort of doing the standardized thing. That's like not something I wanted, and entrepreneurship offers a way out that is, for the most part, still an accepted pathway, right? Because I think one of the things is like, you're not an anarchist. You don't want to be not accepted by society. But you want to find a way in society, within the principles or within like the mechanisms that exist, but do something that is still a bit more different, a bit more rebellious than what the status quo represents. And I think that a lot of that was true, but I think and is true for a lot of people that enter the space. But I think that for me now, what entrepreneurship represents is a unique opportunity to connect with what are your unique skills that you can bring to the world, and what's specific about you that you can bring to the world in terms of art, skill, knowledge, experience, whatever that is, and connect that with something that the world needs. And
that's brilliantly put, actually.
Thank you. And I think that the entrepreneurship attitude, where it's really just about making money, and like you open up Instagram and it's all like make $1 million and cars, jets, whatever. I don't really think it's about that. I think it's about having a core sense of purpose. We might not like capitalism, and the complaints of capitalism are fair, but it is also the greatest model of change that we know of. And no other model of change has been as successful as capitalism. And it has driven progress in many ways. At the same time, it has also cost the earth and beyond in the in many ways that we all kind of know about, and is not something that I need to really repeat. But what we have the opportunity right now with entrepreneurship, with startups, with this mechanism that we've created, this machine that we've created, where you can go from zero to massive cultural, social, economic impact in such a short period of time. You know, Shell has its origins way back into the 1920s and beyond, whereas Google was like 20 years old. And I'm not saying Google's a good corporate player. I'm just saying that it's only
just
20
the
years
scale
old.
of yeah.
And one would agree that, you know, the impact that Google and a company like Shell might have is probably like equivalent if Google doesn't have a higher impact in the world. And so that means that right now what we have is a unique system where we can create change at a pace that is faster than we've ever been able to. And we can use all of that to do good for the world, right? Like connect with what the world really needs is not just about making products and services that people will buy. Connecting with what the world really needs is creating solutions for the largest problems that society face, whether it's climate change, whether it's equitable healthcare, whether it's any of that kind of stuff. And how cool that we have this mechanism to do that. So I think that's what entrepreneurship means to me. And I don't know if that's what entrepreneurship means to everyone, but I think for founders who are not using their skills to like create a better world for us and all future generations are just kind of missing this really amazing opportunity.
I think also it's entrepreneurship can also be seen as a mindset in that maybe starting a company is not for you, but applying those principles of what you're talking about to whatever you're doing, seeing a problem, maybe assessing as to what's unique about you, and then applying that to solving the problem is entrepreneurship.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It's the intersection of everything that makes you you and everything that the world might need.
Okay, so I wish I had a map in front of me because we need drawing pins of where we've traced around the globe now. So we've gone from Dubai to Indiana to Chile to Argentina. So how did you end up in Melbourne?
Yeah. So after Argentina, Indy and I actually moved back to Chile, where we started out tripping. And Indy was in Australia, in Melbourne at the time. Well, she had just come to Melbourne for a wedding. And she was like, "Oh, Kunal, this place is awesome. You'd love it. It's amazing coffee. There's amazing wine. There's cute hipster girls." And
big selling point.
Check. And I was like, "Oh, that's like sounds cool. Maybe I can look at an accelerator program in Australia," because we were applying to accelerator programs. Obviously, at this stage, we were completely location independent, so we were like, wherever is fine. We're happy to move anywhere. And I applied to this program called Angel Cube. That was literally it was the last day for applications. I applied on that day, and this is a casual Wednesday that I just mindlessly applied to this program. On Thursday, they contacted us saying, "Hey, you guys like Atrippin looks cool. You guys want to come in for a pitch on Friday?" Which Indy, because she was here for this wedding, she was like, "Yeah, I could go." And so Indy went. She pitched. They Skyped us all on Saturday. And on Monday, they were like, "Hey, would love to have you. Can you be here by Friday?"
Of the same week?
Same week.
And you were in Chile?
I was in Chile.
Okay, wow. And
so then I went to the Australian embassy to apply for, some sort of emergency tourist visa. Managed to get a visa real quick. And
that's incredible. I didn't know that. It was like in 4 days.
Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah. I got on the flight on Wednesday because I had to be here on Friday.
Yep.
And it takes 2 days with the time difference. So I actually got on a flight on Wednesday. So Wednesday I had the idea, and the next Wednesday I was on a flight here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know. So I'm just keeping my eye on the time. But I would like to talk about just your experience of outtripping, because I think it. I mean, because I was kind of there in the space while it was happening, and you guys were really onto a good thing, but it didn't work out. And I'm wondering if you could just sum up that experience.
Yeah. It was. I mean, I think that I wrote a big blog post about this, and
Actually, which we can link to as well.
yeah, we can definitely link to
Mm,
that. I
mm,
think the summary of that blog post was that it wasn't my Everest, but I came to that
mhm,
conclusion over a period of a year and a half, and it was a really fun and exciting time in my life, and I actually learned so much.
mhm,
And uh, we had lots of challenges in the travel industry. It's a really hard industry to work in
mhm,
and also make money, and even worse now. And sustainability of the business was always at risk. And I
mhm.
lived on $400 a month in Australia, which was insane. And
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
not including rent. So I think like including rent, it was $600 a month. So I'm not
mhm,
really sure that's a better sell. But anyway,
mm,
uh, and I think by the end of it, we were like, oh, this is such a slog. It's such a struggle.
mm,
And I think the question became, for what purpose?
mhm,
Right. And even though we really enjoyed the experience and we really loved the experiences that we were creating for other people in their
mhm,
travels, it felt like the skills that we had acquired, the insane amount of struggle that we had been through to get to this
mhm,
point, and everything that we had done was like could be applied to a more meaningful cause.
mhm.
And
Yep.
that was why I say not my Everest.
Mhm. And I suppose I'm a little bit hesitant to ask this question because I don't want to kind of fetishize failure in that,
Shasha.
like how it's, hashtag failure, like it's become almost this, like this thing to achieve, like, or like almost like this tick box to
Yep.
mark,
Yep.
especially in the startup community,
Yep.
which like it does suck while you're in it.
Horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible experience. Don't recommend it. Rate it 1 star on Yelp.
But if there's one thing when you look back on that not working out, like what would you take away from that failure?
That it is still an opportunity. And I
Mhm.
know that that is probably going into the category of the hashtag business,
Hmm.
but failure is hard. It is
Mhm.
challenging. It's gut wrenching. It's all of those things, but it's also still an opportunity. That
Mhm.
also happens to be the title of my blog post.
Yep.
Anyway, but it is an
Mhm.
opportunity because you can learn from it,
Mhm.
and you have to learn from it. If you don't learn from, I think there's like nothing worse than the repeated failure
Mhm.
where you like don't learn from it over and over again.
Yep.
That's not the kind of failure that I would say be like, yay,
Mhm.
awesome. But failure that you learn from is potentially far more meaningful than just like accidentally getting it right,
Mhm.
because you really like it changes things for you.
Yeah. And so the first one was that, like going it alone is not a good idea.
Yep.
What was the one from Outrippin? Like what was the lesson, would you say?
I think the biggest lesson was it's gonna be a struggle.
Hmm.
It's gonna be hard.
Hmm.
Make it count.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah.
And I suppose which brings us. We've literally gone around the world, but it's. But I think what you're doing now is incredible with Eugene. Um, and how did that start? Like how did that idea germinate?
Yeah. Good question.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I can give you a short answer on this one, but my interest in healthcare sparked after my dad passed away,
Mhm.
which was very suddenly, and I was running Outtrippin at the time, and it sort of sparked a multi-year journey into a growing interest in healthcare.
Mhm.
My dad died pretty suddenly, and if I had to like put it down to a cause, the broken health system would be a pretty top of the list.
In Dubai?
In Dubai, yes.
Yeah, wow. Sorry to hear that.
It wasn't
man.
necessarily the fact that he didn't get good care at the time and all of that kind of stuff. It's really just that we're living in a world where most people don't have access to the quality of care that's possible today, right? Whether it's around prevention, whether it's around proactive healthcare, it's just not accessible to most people. In fact, we're spending most of our time just reacting to things, and I think the health system here, as well as like health systems elsewhere, are very much geared towards that, right? Like you don't try to prevent stuff, you're always just reacting to stuff. And so it kind of sparked my interest in healthcare, in the reality that, you know, we live in a world where equitable access to healthcare is so far from where it needs to be. And and I got really interested in genetics because I found this to be sort of like the next frontier, and the next frontier of healthcare being where you're able to predict and prevent issues before they happen. And these technologies weren't sci-fi anymore. They weren't futuristic. They were here today. And yet most people didn't have access to that. And I found that to be really frustrating. And so I started to dig a little bit more. And the more I dug, the worse it got, where, you know, the vast majority of genomic research only includes people of North European ancestry.
That's crazy, yeah.
Oh, yeah, 80%, which means that about 10% of the world's population represents about 80% of the world's research, and 90% of the world's population represents about 20% of the world's research.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. So 10% of the world's population, which is North European, represents 82% of the global genomic research.
Wow.
And the 90% of the world's population, the remaining world's population, represents just 18% of the world's research into genomics.
Okay, so I'm going to get this wrong, but bear with me here.
Yeah.
I remember reading this article about African American men and prostate cancer.
Prostate cancer, yeah.
Where I think they're 4 times more likely but drugs kind of cater to the Northern European norm, which is So so there's like a huge collection of issues, right? And whether that's drug research and like clinical trials and stuff. And so, for example, there was a drug on the market for 5 years before people figured out it doesn't work on 50% of Asians, and it's a drug to manage a deadly heart condition. So if it doesn't work, people die. And with prostate cancer, and black men are about 4 times more likely to die of prostate cancer. And we'll have to like confirm that number, but it's significantly higher than white men. And black women and breast cancer, once again, similar stats. And so we've got a few things that we're contending with, which is that there's bias in research. So research is biased towards Northern Europeans, essentially, or people of North European ancestry. And that results in that any resulting drugs that come out of that research, any resulting regulations and treatment guidelines that come out of that research are inherently biased towards the population that are included in that research, right? And so we have that bias. This is a research bias, which is incredible. And it's also true on a gendered basis. So women are also deeply underrepresented in research. And so that's a huge problem. Then there's bias in treatment in general. So you have, this is pretty well known, where if you're not white, or if you're not a man, your pain is graded as lower. And pain is like one of those things where it's like subjective, because you have to tell people how much pain you're in. Like, do they still use like what scale of 1 to 10?
There's a scale that they use, and there's huge proven biases here, where clinicians will rate women's pain lower, will rate pain of men that are, or people of color in general, lower. And so we're like talking about intersectional problem
Mm-hmm.
in so many different ways. And so there's that. Then there's also like, so there's just biases everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that all that means is like inequitable healthcare outcomes for what is close to 95% of the world's population.
Wow. Okay. So then you find this out, and like, what was the next step in your thought process? Like,
Well, that's fucked. Was the next immediate next step, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there's so many stats. There's just like so many stories about this stuff that you're just like, I don't understand how this is possible. How is it that women are twice as likely to die of a heart attack as men? Going to the same hospital, same condition, same time, same doctor, same everything, double the mortality. How is that possible? And you're like, oh, it's because all the treatment guidelines are based on research done on men. It's like, well, that just seems stupid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's just like, no, it seems impractical. Like, at this point, I hadn't really like experienced the systemic issues enough to be like, oh yeah, right, like I understand it. All I just saw was like, this is stupid. This is actually just dumb. And so my next step really was, cool, let's figure out why that exists and why these biases exist, and why there's such a disparity in genomics specifically, because I was really interested in that space, because it was about addressing a problem that's going to exacerbate over the next few years. And it all kind of came down to access, right? There was limited access to genetics in large majorities of the world's population. There's limited access to genetics in APAC. There's limited access to genetics in Africa, in South America. And so all of these countries that are underrepresented is because they don't have access to it. They've never been screened, so they don't have they're never entered into any research databases. We're not learning about them because they're never getting tested. And they're not getting tested because we don't know anything about them, so we can't tell them much either. So it became, for me, when I started Eugene, it was like, how can we fix this broken cycle? How can we like take one step in the right direction and spark change in this particular cycle?
Wow. So talk about an Everest.
Yeah. Yeah. Tall mountain.
Yeah. Okay. So then, yeah, you're thinking, okay, like this is the big circle. Like, what's the one small thing we can do?
Yeah.
How did you decide on who's the we? Like.
Yeah. Good question. The first the first obvious we that I knew that we needed was technology person, right? We were always going to be a technology business, so that was like, cool, we need that. But that wasn't the first we that I went out looking for. The first we that I went out looking for was like, right, we need a healthcare person, because I might have studied this for the past 2.5 years. 2.5 years is not a long time in medicine, as most people will tell you. So I was like, there's a whole bunch of, there's like a big blind spot here. I can see the issue on a systemic level, but I don't appreciate the issue on a like individualized, deep down level. And that kind of stuff only happens when you have someone who's a domain expert, who's seen patients, who's experienced this on the ground on a day-to-day basis. And so my first we that I went out looking for was that person who's had the experience, who's seen it. All of these things that I'm looking on a systemic level, who's actually seen it in real life, who's actually only seen 10% of the world's population.
And I suppose, like, when you started having these conversations, especially with the medical establishment and professionals, were they surprised by this data, or did they acknowledge it and said, what can we do?
Most knew.
Yeah.
I mean, none of it's surprising. I think it's only surprising to people not from the industry. A lot of people from the industry, and Zoe, my co-founder, who is this person, says this all the time, which is like, everyone in the industry is trying to change it. No one's happy about these things. It's not like people are like, oh yeah, that's cool. No big deal. People get into medicine because they want to improve people's lives, and they deeply want equitable healthcare outcomes. This isn't a thing that people are doing on purpose, right? And so and that's the reason why Zoe was like, yeah, let's do this together, because she had seen it in the public and private healthcare system. She had tried to change it from the inside, and it wasn't working. And that's kind of why we sort of, banded forces.
But there's also like you said, a technology component to this. Can you explain that? Like, how does technology come into this?
Yeah. So a lot of, we like bringing Zoe on. One of the things that became clear in terms of, so when we talk about that cycle and the loop as to lack of access, one of the key components there was a lack of specialists. It's just like there are not enough genetic specialists out there to make this stuff accessible to you and us and everyone else, and also the doctors and clinicians who need to use this information and make medical decisions for themselves, for their patients, right? And so if you don't have enough specialists, then of course most people can't access it. And if most people can't access it, we go down a very traditional and similar path as we always have, is that if only few people have access to it, it's either the rich or like people who are just like already really sick. And this is like a traditional thing in healthcare, right? Where you can get access to really good healthcare if you're quite rich, and or if you're really, really sick and you go into the public health system takes care of you, especially in Australia. And so these were the only people that actually had access to this stuff because of this bottleneck where there's just like not that many specialists. And we needed to fix that problem, and we wanted to fix that problem the best way we know how, which is to use technology to automate as much as we can. And and that's why technology played a big role. Yeah.
And so, like, when you think, so you knew this, you had this massive problem to solve. You knew like, okay, there are a couple of things we can do. But when you're thinking of like products or services for your company, like where did your mind go to? Like, how did you come up with your first product?
Yeah, so a big thing for us was like, how can we improve healthcare outcomes, right? Like, what can we do? Because we didn't want to just, sell garbage that no one needed. We wanted to make sure that we're selling tests that were going to have tangible impact on healthcare outcomes, which meant that we needed to look at the technologies that are out there that are ready for prime time, right? It's really about, it takes about 17 years for a test to go from research to practice, which is like
a medical test.
Medical test, and like, or just like medical. Yeah, the things that advance from research to practice takes about 17 years to become enter mainstream practice. So, which means for about 17 years, we have knowledge that we could be using to help improve people's lives that we're not effectively using. I'm not sure how many billions of people are affected by this, but it's probably all of the people on Earth.
Yep.
And so it's like, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like the gap is so insane that, if there's an opportunity to shorten that gap, and the specialists are usually on the on the bleeding edge because they're most aware of what's happening, right? And so if there's a way to shorten that gap by using and scaling specialist knowledge in genetics, that could be really, really valuable, right? So that's kind of where we started. In terms of the products that we were choosing, we're like, what are the products that are out there today that should be accessible by everyone? What are the no-brainers? And carrier screening was one of them, right? Which is that it helps people understand if they're at risk of having a child with a serious genetic condition. Everyone should have access to this test. It's like hundreds of conditions that we could avoid passing on. There's hundreds of conditions that if we had advanced knowledge about, we would do something about it, and we would be able to do something about it in the current medical healthcare setting. Everyone should do this test, obviously. It's a no-brainer. Those are the types of products that we wanted to bring to market. And this is the first one we chose. Partly it was because of Zoe's experience in the industry and what she had experience in terms of obstetrics and reproductive technologies. So that helped. But what also helped was that, this is something that can create tangible impact on healthcare outcomes today.
And I suppose, how would that tie into the your big mission, which is making healthcare data more equitable and more.
Yeah.
Yep.
So making genetics accessible to all, and that requires several points of fixing in terms of the broader cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is tests aren't accessible, which means people aren't getting screened.
Mm-hmm.
And tests aren't accessible because they're either geared towards Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the most popular tests on the market is a 3-gene test
Mm-hmm.
that only screens for conditions that are common in a Caucasian community.
Mm-hmm.
Why this test is still out there, I'm not sure. It shouldn't.
Mm.
I understand its importance when it first came out, but now you can screen for 300 conditions for not a significant difference in price, and those conditions cover a larger percentage of the world's populations, or like the conditions that a larger percentage of the world's population face.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we got to do is make tests more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
That was our first port of call. So that's the first step. In doing so, we can actually like make tests by using more inclusive tests. We actually make those tests accessible to a wider demographic of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, if I tell you that this test covers conditions that have been more common in your community, then you're like, oh, this is going to be relevant for me, right?
Mhm.
Because if I'm going to tell you like this condition that you've never heard of, you're going to be like, why do I care?
Mhm.
Whereas when those conditions are common in your community, it's more relevant for those
Mhm.
people.
Yep.
So that's kind of the first step that we had to take to make the testing itself more accessible to a wider community.
Mhm.
Our long play is around the technology that we develop to actually be able to accelerate research itself.
Mhm.
So when you're doing research, you're doing the same sort of genetic counseling that you're doing in a one-to-one basis when you're dealing with patients.
Mhm.
And the technology we're developing is kind of custom built for low-touch genetics education and
Mhm.
consent and recruiting and things like that.
Mhm.
And so the long play is to help accelerate research by repurposing the platform we've developed so far to do the testing that we've been doing, and make it possible for clinical researchers to really scale up how many people they can include in their research,
Mhm.
right? And large-scale research is the path forward
Mhm.
towards greater access for everyone, as long as that research includes everyone in our community and
yep.
not just a small subset.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. This is a bit of a reductive question, but so genetics is for I suppose most of my life is kind of on the cusp of sci-fi, and now it's reality. And so with what you're doing, how do you like, or are you thinking about how you prevent like a bad Black Mirror episode where people want designer babies and
Yeah. So the thing is, the technology will exist.
Mm-hmm.
You can't change that. You can't stop that.
Mm-hmm.
You can maybe slow it down a little bit, but you're probably not going to slow it down too much.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that means that we need to decide as a society, what is it that we want to want?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the bigger question. Because if you accept that the technology is going to exist, then we got to figure out what is it that we want to want. And
what we want to want. Yeah.
Yeah, because what we want is going to be possible. So the only thing we can change is what we want. And so that's like one thing. And then the other thing is that there's like guiding forces that we can use to kind of drive this question and this drive the answers to this question as a society. So if we continue to find differences within ourselves and each other, and we glorify or demonize those differences, we'll use the technologies that we have accessible to us
Mm-hmm.
to like use to that end.
Yep.
And so this question isn't necessarily about genetics. I mean, it kind of is, because I understand that the technology is coming, but the fact is that the technology is coming anyway.
Yep. Mm.
So like,
Mm.
who do we want around to be leading those conversations? That's the first question to me. And that was one of the reasons why I got into genetics in the first place. Who do we want in those conversations? I was like, well, I want to be in those conversations because, quite frankly, at the moment, it seems like the only people in those conversations are, I'm going to say old white men, because that's just like what it is. And it's time for us to take an active interest in these conversations. Us being people of color, us being women, us being like people who are underrepresented in these communities, in these conversations, I should say, because if we're not included in those conversations, then those decisions are made without us. And because the technology is coming anyway, our only option is to actually be leading it in directions that we want them to be going into. That's kind of how I feel about that.
Yep.
And I know it's
that
kind
makes
of like
sense.
a roundabout answer.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually answer the question. But yeah.
Yeah. I suppose so. Just as we wind up, because I'm just again keeping an eye on the time. Just with Eugene now, do you feel like you found your Everest?
Yeah, I found my current Everest for sure. Like,
Yep.
I know for sure this will not be the last company I ever start. I think that, everything we learn will, everything I learn like kind of takes me to a new place and create more and more ambition.
Yep.
Right. And I think that, it's such an important problem to be solving, and I'm really invested in solving this particular problem right now, but I know for sure in the future I will start another company too. So it is my current Everest.
Yeah. But I think I've got to say, like, what I suppose admire about you is just this kind of fearlessness of going after big problems. I mean, not so much, or even things like moving to Melbourne in like 4 days from Chile, or even going to Chile in the first place. Like, what would you ascribe that attribute to, or do you think that's teachable in a way? Like,
I mean, I don't really like believe in this sort of God-given trait, so I feel like surely it's surely teachable, right? Like, I don't really believe in God, so yeah, I feel like it's definitely teachable. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. It's a hard question.
I suppose what I'm trying to get at is this search of yours that you're on.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot to do with you kind of questioning the status quo and trying to, in some ways, rebel against the status quo, and that's always been like your Everest.
Yeah.
But then to do that, you had to kind of push yourself and be courageous in certain ways.
Yeah.
Where you see something, okay, that's on the other side of the globe, but holy shit, I need to get there.
Yeah.
Not many people would do that.
Yeah.
I at 23, I certainly would have done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suppose what I'm trying to get at is trying to trace that attribute of, okay, here's what I want to get, but I need to be, not sort of get X, Y, and Z, but I need to be X, Y, and Z to get there.
Yeah.
Am I making sense, or am I just
I think I'm trying to follow, but I'm gonna need that to link to a question that I can answer. I think I'm getting it, like where it's like, yeah, no, let's try it again.
Okay. Or maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get to, which is usually my final question, which is, like, the name of this podcast is On Meaningful Work.
Yeah.
To you, what does that term on meaningful work mean?
Yeah. I think it's that thing that I mentioned earlier, which is how can you connect what's unique about you to something that the world needs. And I think that that's meaningful because you're serving a greater purpose in the community around us, and you're adding value to the world, and you're doing it in a way that connects with who you are and, for the lack of a better word, your soul, right? Like it's connecting like to your soul, to like to the world at large, or the universe at large. And I feel like that's meaningful work.
Yeah. And I'm going to try this question again.
Yeah.
And I suppose to achieve that goal of meaningful work, you need to be courageous.
Yeah.
How did you become courageous? Or was that an inborn trait? Or was that something you had to
work at?
Yeah.
Might be controversial, but I think I just tricked myself into it. I think things are scary. I think that's like the whole part of it. I mean, that's like, the whole point of courage, I suppose, is to actually be afraid as well.
Yeah.
I usually just like trick myself into being like, it's going to be such a great adventure. And it helps to have family and friends who are so incredibly supportive, who've like helped me throughout this whole experience. And feeling like I definitely feel like it's a privilege to actually find that courage as well, because there's a lot of people who couldn't, right? Like, or wouldn't be able to. And I think that that's something that I want to note, because I think that's important.
Yep.
But I think having the support of friends and family around, having that connection to yourself, I think, is really, really important, because if you connect to yourself in that way, where you're like really able to appreciate and understand what is it that's unique about you and how that connects to the world at large, like that requires connection to yourself and connection to the world.
Yes. Yeah. And I think also
that helps.
I think just kind of reflecting on my experience, I think is that thing around community, in that finding your tribe, and then the tribe kind of lifts you and kind of helps you be more courageous.
Feel safer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I found that you could find that, depends on what your goal is.
100%.
There's communities,
Yeah.
online or wherever, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I found that like initially with Inspire 9, and then
Definitely. And like I think that's played a huge role. Inspire 9 has played a huge role in this.
Co-working space in Richmond, sorry.
Yeah, good. And Startup Chile played a huge role in this. My friends in Chicago, when I had to like make that decision to move to Chile, played a huge role in that. So 100%, no one does anything alone. So like the people around you makes a big difference. And I feel like they can make it safe for you to take risks.
Yeah. And as the champagne comes down the stairs, I think it's a good place to wrap up, Kunal.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, buddy. Really appreciate it. I know we've gone way over time.
You're very welcome. This might be your longest episode ever. You may want to edit most of it out.
I think we got some good stuff here, but really, thank you again.
Awesome.